What's up, everybody? Welcome into the F6 Football Podcast. Cam Copeland here, joining you with Alex Roglin, and we are back. None of this Friday, Saturday night nonsense we've been putting you guys through these last few weeks. We are back. We are recording this on Tuesday night to actually give everyone a chance to listen to the episode, get our numbers up a little bit. You know what I'm saying. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back on track. We've kind of kept everybody guessing, but now we're back and we're back to our schedule on Tuesday, which, contrary to the past few weeks, or maybe the last month there, really, Tuesday is going to be our preferred night. So that's just a great night for us to recap everything that happened over the weekend and the Monday night game. And it gives us a good chance to get in here, get our content in here for you guys so you can consume it and be ready to roll going into the Thursday night game and the following week. So I am glad to be back at it, my friend.
Yeah, we'll try to stick to Tuesday. Next week might be Wednesday. It's my fiance's birthday coming up, so I'll have to let you guys know. But we will definitely be with you earlier in the week than we have been lately. And we are going to start off talking about this last week's games. This last week was one of those weeks where, sometimes you have a busy weekend, and it's been busy with holidays and traveling. And finally, I was able to sit down and just watch each of these games thoroughly. And it honestly felt so nice. So I'm looking forward to talking about some of these games, Alex. Where do you want to start, man?
As always, maybe we should start with our upsets, which I know is always a good starting point for us. So I am I guess I'm the Carolina Panthers maybe this year, because I keep trying lots of different ways to get out of the swirling the swirling downward trend, but I have lost another upset pick. So my upset pick was I picked the Denver Broncos over the Houston Texans, and that once, like many of these picks, that looked pretty close. If Russell Wilson converts that touchdown at the end of that game, then I would be getting a W in my upset pick column. But unfortunately for the Broncos, they weren't able to get it done at the end of the game, and Houston survives another close game, which they had lost the last 3 weeks on last minute field goals or really late touchdowns. I mean, they had kind of heartbreaking losses 3 weeks in a row. So, happy for Houston that they were able to hang on. But unfortunately, that is another loss for me, which takes my record now to 3-8. So not doing so hot in the upset pick column.
Better than the Panthers, though. Plus, you don't have to forfeit any picks next year. So
I'm the Jets then, maybe?
Something like that. Oh, man. So the biggest takeaway from that game for me is that Will Anderson is a certified stud, man. He took over that game. Rookie defensive lineman, right? They traded up to the 3rd overall pick by giving up the 12th pick of last draft and a future first-round pick, their own future first-round pick, which many people thought would be really early. The Texans have proven most of those people wrong at this point anyway. And they look like they're turning that franchise around that we talked about pretty extensively last week, if I recall right. But Will Anderson, he was just everywhere. And he was winning one-on-one pass rush reps. He was closing in quickly. He was reading the field well. He knew what was going on. And it's just a very impressive performance, both mechanically and, physically, and then between the ears. He has it all. And it was worth it for them to trade all that capital just to go up and get an edge rusher.
Yeah, and I think he was kind of coming on slow. I mean, he was a guy that earlier in the year, obviously CJ Stroud was turning heads pretty early. But I remember earlier in the year, I think even on another show, I was like, I forgot his name. I was like, who's that first round guy that the Texans got? But he's making sure everybody knows his name now. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And my upset pick, I decided to take the Eagles for a second week in a row over the 49ers. And man, statement game from the 49ers and Brock Purdy, because they just slaughtered the Eagles. And I love all the Eagles fans on Twitter and whatnot. Do you see the narrative going around how it's really hard to play 3 games in 13 days and the Eagles are tired compared to the 49ers, which is just, normal NFL schedule? I think That's pretty funny. Eagles, at me, I guess. But 49ers took this game, brought it home, and it was a dominant performance. So good for them, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked a little about this, during our show last week. I mean, I do think the Eagles were tired. Like, there's no doubt, right? Like they look gassed, right? They had certainly had, and we talked about this, right? They had, two, I think, really hard fought emotional games coming off the last minute overtime win against the Bills and a very difficult comeback win, against the Chiefs the week before. So I do think they were tired. And of course, the Niners, were coming not only off the bye, but they had their target really on Philadelphia this whole season. After all the kind of the chatter after the NFC Championship game last year, particularly guys like Deebo Samuel, coming out and saying that really they were a lot better team. They just didn't have a quarterback and all that. Well, I mean, you can talk it as long as you can back it up. And obviously he was dynamic in that game. The Eagles did not want anything to do with him. So I think it was a combination. It was kind of a perfect storm there, for the Eagles. But yeah, with the scheduling thing, the Eagles are not the first team or the only team to have to play difficult stretch of games close together. Nor will they be the last. And so it's part of it. It's part of the grueling, difficult part of the NFL schedule. So, I mean, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. So no sympathy for the Eagles. You got to pick yourself back up, figure out a way to move forward. But before we move on from that game, I got to say, man, even though it was a one-sided game, I loved it. I enjoyed every second of that game because it reminded me, honestly, of watching football as a kid. When I grew up in the 90s, man, there was so much like just physical big hits. There was a lot of chatter. It was just like a sort of a raw, almost gladiatorial element to the game. And that was coming out, man. I loved it. I don't think Greenlaw should have been kicked out, and we don't have to go down that. There's a lot of content around that and the big mafia guy Dom on the sidelines, and all that. I mean, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that going around. You could, look into that. It's quite entertaining. But like, I mean, I loved it. I love guys, when there's big hits in the sidelines, fingers being pointed, Travarius Ward and AJ Brown, like, basically wrestling each other to the ground after each play. I mean, because to me as a fan, I care when I know the guys that are playing care, and when you could just see the product of how much they're pouring into this game and how much it means to them, it makes it an awesome thing to watch. That's why the NFL is king. That's why it's on top, because the players really care, especially when compared to like baseball, who just has too many games, or basketball, right, where half the time the guys don't even play, and when they do play, they lollygag up and down the court, and they're like, oh well, there's just no energy. So that's my mini rant. Take us off today. That was a very entertaining game. I could watch that all day. Give me more games like that.
Yeah, there were some battles in the trenches too. I know Brian Baldinger posted some really cool snippets and explanations on Twitter of both sides of the ball. The Nick Bosa Lane Johnson matchup was spectacular, and then Trent Williams against defensive tackle Jalen Carter, who was showcasing some technique and showing why Trent Williams is the best. And Jalen Carter is one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL in his rookie season. I mean, he's just that good. But Trent Williams is a surefire Hall of Famer. I mean, he's one of the best tackles who have probably ever played the game, honestly, all things considered. So, yeah, agreed. Excellent matchup. And unfortunately, we both go 0-1 on the week, but that means our spread remains the same moving forward. So no pull, no way, not out of the woods just yet.
That's right.
But before we move on to this upcoming week and our upcoming picks, let's talk about some of these other games from this last week. And just because it's fresh in our minds from last night, I want to hit the Bengals-Jaguars game. Kind of a funny story. I went into that game and in my big money fantasy football league that still has kickers, which shouldn't be a thing. I'm not going to start on that. But I was against the Jaguars kicker, and I needed him to not score a certain amount of points. So I was spending the entire game just rooting against McManus, which feels weird because I'm looking for turnovers, stops, and then I celebrate when they get down and they score touchdowns. And then I get nervous on third downs on the opposing side of the field. It was a weird viewing experience for me, just rooting against one kicker. Probably not what most people were doing last night, but that aside, what a brutal game for injuries, man. With Trevor Lawrence getting knocked out, he is high ankle sprain, I believe, was the consensus, and Joe Burrow is clearly out, of course. So the end of that game was the battle of the backup, but it was still a very exciting game. Went into OT, which again I was sweating through all of overtime because if McManus kicked a field goal in overtime, I would have lost. So that is how close it was, but it was a fun game regardless.
Yeah, it was a surprisingly fun game. But all right, I as a Chiefs fan, I got nothing against the Jags, but I do got to call out. I saw some other folks talking about this today, and I completely agree. All right, literally the most valuable asset that the Jacksonville Jaguars have is Trevor Lawrence, right? Yes. Trevor Lawrence hurts his ankle, and there's literally no carts available to cart him off. It literally takes two guys like a security guard to help him hobble. He has to put weight on his own ankle as he's trying to get off the field. That to me is insane. I mean, what are you guys doing? Like, how can you not have a cart available to help cart a player off the field? I mean, and not even just any player, but Trevor Lawrence. I mean, that is just insane to me. It's like a Mickey Mouse operation. I mean, come on, people. If you're an NFL franchise, what are you doing? Like that to me is just mind-boggling that they wouldn't have a cart available. Even if he says he doesn't need it, do you know what you say? You say too bad. You're like our 400. He's probably he'll end up getting some massive contract and a massive contract extension. I mean, this is like a $500 million asset for the Jaguars over the next 10 years, potentially, right? But he's clearly their most important asset. And they're just like, hey, you security guard, why don't you just kind of come over here and help this guy get off the field? I mean, what are you guys doing? That's a joke, man. If you're a Jags fan, you should be outraged. You should contact them and let them know that's ridiculous. This is the NFL. Buy a dang cart, have it available so you can get guys off the field without having to put weight on their hurt ankle.
Yeah, it's baffling. That's all I have to say about that. It doesn't make sense. But hopefully he recovers swiftly. And I think they're saying right now, they haven't disclosed the severity at this point, but I've at least heard rumors of him returning for a potential playoff run if they can, close the season strong with, is it Beathard? CJ Beathard, right? Yeah. So we'll see, man. We'll see. I haven't looked at their schedule upcoming yet, but I can right now. It looks like Browns and Ravens are going to be tough, but then the Bucks and the Panthers are winnable. So they could still make it without Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, they can, but the Texans are hot on their heel too. I mean, I think that's the Texans are one game back, and definitely, and I haven't looked at their schedule, but I mean, they're definitely not out of the woods yet. So I would expect them to try to have, bring Lawrence back. And I mean, if you think about that high ankle sprain, I mean, everybody's different. I mean, Mahomes did play through it. He got a high ankle sprain, obviously, in that game against the Jaguars in the playoffs, and then played on it, all the way through the Super Bowl. So, if Lawrence has to play, I would assume that he's going to want to be out there. But hopefully they can give him at least a couple weeks rest and then maybe bring him back late in season if they have to fight for that playoff spot. If not, then go ahead and sit him till the playoffs.
And they're different severities of ankle sprains.
Absolutely.
As well. High ankle sprains specifically. I mean, sometimes you can, if you're a really tough dude, you can stand on it. And sometimes you literally can't. It's just swollen and painful to the point where you physically could not stand on it. Sure. So we don't know the severity. Maybe if it comes to that, he'd fight through it like Mahomes. I'm sure he seems like the kind of guy who would. But hopefully it won't come to that. And it's funny that you say the Texans are 1 game behind because the Colts are 1 game behind too. The Colts are technically ahead of the Texans right now in the division.
It's true.
So
It's true. I don't know how.
I don't know, but they're not out of the woods. It's anyone's division. And what a story it would be for the Texans to come back and win. That would be great. It would really be great.
Yep. Another couple games, Cam, before we move on. I mean, I'll touch briefly on my beloved Kansas City Chiefs losing on Sunday Night Football. A couple of things stood out about that game. I mean, obviously it was not a great night for Chiefs injury wise. They've actually been one of the more healthier teams this season. But they have been short. Nick Bolton, who is obviously their starting middle linebacker and definitely one of the best middle linebackers I think in the league, and he's been out for I think about 4 or 5 weeks now. But it hasn't felt as impactful as it otherwise would because of the play of Drew Tranquill, who's really came in. He came over from the Chargers in the offseason, and he had really been playing great, organizing. He's the green dot, so he's calling the plays, calling the coverages and the adjustments on the defense. He's done a great job with that. But in this game, he goes out with a concussion. I think it was the first drive, right? And then so that by that point, the Chiefs are now down to their third string linebacker, actually calling the defenses, calling adjustments. And all things considered, I thought Cochrane, their third string linebacker, I thought he played decent, under the circumstances. But, I just got to give credit to the Packers. I mean, certainly Jordan Love played great. I think there was a couple, there's always a bit of luck that goes into it. Every good quarterback, has to get some good breaks here and there. I thought that fourth down throw that he had where he just sort of chucked it up and it was actually in triple coverage. And I think it was Dobbs, pulled it in. It was a good, I don't know if it was a good decision. He got a little lucky on that one, but then the very next throw that he threw to Watson was an absolute laser. And that was a phenomenal throw. I mean, he couldn't have thrown that ball any better. So, a little bit of luck, but definitely some pretty big improvements from Jordan Love. So overall, I thought it was a lot of it was about the Packers playing well. They beat the Lions and beat them pretty good over Thanksgiving, came out and really, I thought played a great competitive game against the Chiefs. There were some bad calls both ways. Certainly, I know that's been a lot of talk this week. The refs, unfortunately, have been sort of in the center of that game. And of course, when there's always bad calls, but when they're in primetime games and in close games and happen so close to the end of the game, it certainly leaves a bad taste, I think, for all fans. But either way, congrats to the Packers. I thought that was one of their best games of the season. Obviously, the Chiefs, they're reeling a little bit on defense. Had multiple other guys get hurt, but they're still rounding into form, and I'm not worried about them at all. They still have Andy Reid, still have Patrick Mahomes, still have Chris Jones, and even Travis Kelce, who's shown his age a bit this year. But they're trying to continue to bring Rashee Rice and other guys along. So, and honestly, Cam, I just think the AFC, I just don't see. Thinking ahead, I mean, I really think the only other team in my mind that I think is capable of taking the Chiefs down in the postseason is probably the Ravens. And they have not had a lot of postseason success and really very minimal postseason success under Lamar Jackson. It's not to say that they can't do that, but it is going to be a little bit of unfamiliar territory for them as opposed to the Chiefs. And then you look at the other teams. I mean, the Dolphins are fun. They like the boat race teams, but they still have yet to beat a playoff caliber team. They've lost all of them this season. And the Chiefs, I think handled. I know it was over in Germany, but I think the Chiefs handled them pretty well. Earlier in the season, and so I mean, then now the Jags. I mean, you get Trevor Lawrence's injury, and then we could talk about some of these other AFC playoff teams, but it really seems like it's shaping up to be. The NFC is starting to look a lot better, I think, than the AFC, based on the injuries, and the Chiefs are going to probably be positioned to certainly be one of the final teams in the AFC again. And anything less than that, I think, would certainly be a failure.
Yeah, and again, Miami's ahead of them currently as well. And I was just looking, and the current standings right now have my preseason Super Bowl prediction, which is Philadelphia over Miami. So that's fun to see. Probably won't last that much longer. But with regard to the Chiefs, that game, as you said, had some major injuries. Did you see Brian Cook's ankle? Do you see the
I did
injury?
not go back and look at it, but they'd said that they said he didn't break it though, so he had a negative
his
X-ray.
foot was backwards.
Ooh.
I mean, I have a screenshot of it. Won't send it to you unless you want it. His foot is actually backwards. And the article that posts that picture says expected potential 4 to 5 week return. I'm like, what are they giving these guys? I know it's not broken, but geez, if your foot is facing the wrong direction, you're going to be back playing in the NFL in potentially 5 weeks. That's unconfirmed, but man, maybe the NFL has something to help out with some of my more minor injuries. Give me a little bit of that. But
yeah, seriously.
Anyway, and then Drew Tranquill concussion, and on the other side of the ball, Christian Watson again. I don't know the severity of his hamstring, but he's dealt with hamstring injuries for his whole life, pretty much. I'm pretty sure since high school, and hamstrings are nagging, and he will probably be out. I would think just based on his history, he'd be out the rest of the season, but I could easily be wrong on that. He might be back next week for as far as I know, but it's really not good to hear. And it will certainly at least hamper his performance if he does come back early. So, but bummer there. He's a fun guy to watch, stud athlete who's still learning the position. But yeah, wish them all speedy recoveries. And then just to touch on one last game, unless there's more you want to go over. Washington, they had a football game. That's it. They had a football game. It was against Miami, if you missed it. It was a slaughter. 2 different Miami players have come out and talked about that game. Tyreek Hill said, we're all in the NFL. We're playing against good people. I don't know why they played man coverage on me the entire game. That seems kind of disrespectful, but, I guess they trust their players, but it doesn't make sense. And if he was anything less than what he is, it would just sound ridiculously cocky, but it's true. Ron Rivera took over defensive play calling recently, and it's a little peculiar. That's all I'll say. It's peculiar. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they were saying as long as you are disciplined, the Commanders aren't very difficult to play against because of how my takeaway was he was saying how their scheme is very vanilla and the only time they get anything done is when Sam Howell rolls outside the pocket. So you just have to stay disciplined. People are interpreting it a little differently depending on who you ask. A lot of it, the interpretations have to do with inherent bias, whether because there's such a huge argument, I guess, over social media right now among the fan base saying, quote, whose fault is it? Eric Bieniemy or Sam Howell? Which is just a ridiculous argument. I mean, there's so many things wrong. Whenever someone's arguing to that extent, and it's all the answer is always both, and then in this case, both and more, right? It's just not clicking. Talent's not there around Sam Howell. Offensive line's not there. Sam Howell's not helping by holding onto the ball too much. You've heard it here. You've heard it a million times before. And then I don't think Eric Bieniemy is making things easy for him either. It's just not working. So I do think that they clean house this offseason. If I had to guess now, that would include Eric Bieniemy, but we don't know. So at this point, I'm just looking at other 4-win teams and then rooting for them to win to make life a little bit interesting, hoping for the Commanders to get a top 4 pick for reasons I will share more when we get to more draft content.
Yes, absolutely. So everybody make sure you come back for our draft shows. A couple of things just on that. I think the interesting thing about Tyreek Hill's comments, or even more interesting than I think what you mentioned, is that one of those touchdowns, he's running past Kendall Fuller. And Kendall Fuller and Tyreek Hill were teammates in Kansas City in that first Super Bowl. And of course, Eric Bieniemy was the coordinator for that Super Bowl as well. So I'm sort of like, not only is that odd, but it's like you would literally think that Tyreek Hill's former teammate and former coach would know that's a bad idea. And yet it was like, I don't know if Ron Rivera is just stubborn and he's like, my way or the highway. I have no idea, but that just makes it even more ironic. So yeah, and then I think back to the Bieniemy and Hal. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of blame to go around, right? Because you also have the offensive line hasn't always been giving the protection, right? But like you said, he's been holding on to it. So I think that I agree with your prediction, though. I think Hal has shown enough that I definitely think they got to give him another year for sure. Try to get him some better offensive line help. Maybe change some coaching up and kind of see what happens. Get an offensive minded head coach. And see where it goes. And I do think the Harris group is going to want to bring their own folks in. So I think it is probably going to be, I wouldn't be surprised if they clean it all out and then try to go get an offensive minded head coach.
Yeah, I agree. I think usually teams, when they switch head coaches, they go from one thing to the polar opposite.
Yep.
People this team specifically has been building up the defense in the draft. Each and every year, you have a defensive-minded head coach. There's so many first-round picks allocated to the defense, right? You had John Allen, Daron Payne, Montez Sweat, Chase Young, Jamin Davis, Manuel Forbes this last year. And it's one of the worst defenses in the NFL, even before they traded away Montez Sweat and Chase Young. So I think, there are a lot of offseason a lot of candidates. And a lot of people are talking about some they're the Ben Johnson types, the offensive-mindedly younger head coaches. And then there are people like Dan Quinn, who I also think is a pretty good head coach, but I think he's too similar to Ron Rivera to even be in consideration. So I think we will get an offensive-minded head coach. I think we'll try to go a little younger. It seems like what Harris and the group would want, but hire a GM who they like, let the GM make the decisions, get the fan base on board, and start from there. So I'm very excited for the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, man. Should we move on to this upcoming week?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, we can start with our upset pick once again. And this week was really difficult for me. I went through them each quite a few times, and I really wasn't confident with any of them. I thought about going Philadelphia a third time, but going into this week, I was thinking, you know what? I think the Cowboys will win this. I'll take them as my upset pick, but they're favored by 3.5, so I can't do that. So I am going to go with Denver over the Chargers, because one game we did not talk about was the Chargers New England game last week. And something, if you didn't catch that game, Chargers won 6-0. Chargers had a 5.5 point spread. They covered the spread of 5.5 points with 6 points. That's unreal. So, I mean, they just didn't look good. It looked, the organization, it just hasn't looked good for the last few weeks. And the Broncos are on the up and up. I know they lost this last week to Houston, who is also, as I said, on the up and up. But I think the Broncos are just a much better team than the Chargers right now, which is crazy to say, but here we are. And I know the Chargers are at home, but I don't think they turn it around this week. I give the coaching edge to the Broncos. And that's all that really matters right now, because the talent has not been prevailing on the field for the Chargers.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think that makes a lot of sense. I would agree. I think the only advantage I might give the Chargers would be, I would say quarterback.
Herbert.
But even then, I don't think Herbert's having a particularly great year, especially considering his standard. And so, yeah, I think that makes sense. And honestly, I do think that the loser of this game, which I think probably will be the Chargers, will be done. Right. They're not making the playoffs. The Chargers,
no.
This is desperation mode for them at 5-7. They're already a long shot. And, there's multiple teams in the AFC. They're 2 and 3 wins in front of them fighting for wild card spots. So they're not dead yet. But if they lose this game, they're dead. And I honestly think the same for even the Broncos, even though the Broncos are 6-6. If the Broncos lose this game, I think they're done too. So I think we're going to see two desperate teams. And so, yeah, I think that should be a close one. All right. So for mine, I was kind of in the same position. I didn't love a lot of the lines on the games this week, but you already kind of mentioned it earlier, but I decided that they are technically an underdog, and I know that they did not look good this last week, but I think I am going to take the Eagles.
Okay.
And I know they just let you down, but I am expecting a bounce back from them because this is a must-win game against Dallas. Definitely. I mean, Philly is got a game up. They're fighting for that 1 seed in the NFC, which I'm sure with is really. I mean, that's so brutal now to get that. So important. So I think they're going to throw the kitchen sink at Dallas. I know they're on the road, and obviously that's why it's a 3.5 point line, and so obviously the bookmakers sort of think Dallas is maybe their home, so they get 3 points. So it's kind of a pick 'em / they think Dallas might be a little bit better than Philly, which I think that's pretty interesting. So I know that they're tired, they're beat up, they just got their butts kicked. So I expect to see them bring back a really great effort this week, and so I'm taking the Eagles over the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, I think the Cowboys play a lot better at home, it seems, and I'm looking at it now. They are 6-0 at home, so they and 3-3 away currently. So I think the Cowboys get a bigger advantage than a lot of these teams playing at home. It seems like they're more in their element. A lot of fan interaction, a lot of noise, just like being there. But I guess. But I don't blame you for making the pick. I picked the Eagles the last 2 weeks, and you realize you picked Denver last week, right? So you just flip-flop teams.
We flipped them. Yes, exactly.
This week. So if we get let down again, we'll know to, I don't know, change our methods somehow. Maybe flip a coin from here on out if it keeps going in this direction. But I definitely don't hate the pick. Again, they're the only other team I had on my short list, and I only had those 2 teams just in case you decided to go first tonight. So not a lot of lines that I like, not a lot of close lines, it seems, looking at this slate ahead, right? You have the 49ers and Seattle Seahawks, and that's over a 10-point spread. You have the Dolphins Titans, that's 13-point spread. Actually, I guess those are the only double-digit spreads, but I know it just seems like the teams that are favored definitely have the advantage this week.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple other good games. I mean, there's a couple surprising good games that I think probably wouldn't have been excited about a while ago. But I think actually might be decent. And I think one of those would actually be this Colts Bengals game. That's a 1:00 game on Sunday. I know we just talked about both these teams briefly, but somehow, somehow Minshew, keeps this Colts team, which I think they're one of the least talented rosters in the NFL. Like when I look at it, not a whole lot of names really pop on that roster as guys that I think would be big impact players. But I do think what it really speaks to is a new coach, Shane Steichen, right? Coming in there and really turning that program around. And I think, coming from Philly and able, and obviously we saw what he did with Jalen Hurts and actually had, Richardson looking good there for a little bit. And he's out, but man, they're playing hard. They really believe, and they got nothing to lose. So impressive what the Colts have done so far, and they're right in the mix for the playoffs. And then the Bengals, they're obviously, a good defensive team and have really elite weapons. I don't think anyone's ever really questioned the weapons. Now they had some issues early in the season. I mean, Burrow was obviously banged up, but this quarterback, that they had, that they have now. I mean, he looked great. He looked like elite in Monday night against another playoff team, against the Jags, who were certainly going to be in the playoffs, I think. So I think this might be a sneaky good game, honestly, and one that I actually will surprise myself and probably tune in for.
All right, I have to bring this up just because I'm scanning through the games, and I already know that this will be talked about on Red Zone Football this upcoming Sunday. There are 4 games where I believe backup quarterbacks are facing against each other. That's unreal. You have the Patriots against the Steelers, Zappy versus Trubisky.
Right.
You have the game you were just talking about, the Colts Bengals, That's Minshew versus Jake Browning. The Jaguars
Mhm.
versus the
The
Browns.
Browns.
Who's playing for the Browns?
It's
Because
Flacco again, isn't it? Or is
it
DTR
he
back?
got Flacco got demoted back down to the practice squad and said they weren't
Oh,
making a
okay.
decision
So I
yet.
guess DTR then.
Yeah, he's listed as questionable. So
Okay.
Dorian Thompson Robinson against CJ Beathard. And then you
Right.
have there's one more Vikings
Raiders. Yeah.
O'Connell versus, help me out, Dobbs.
Dobbs.
Jeez. So yeah, that's crazy. It just goes to show how important backup quarterbacks are in today's football. I mean, a lot of these teams are competing for playoff spots, right? I mean,
Yep.
at least most of them: Steelers, Bengals, Colts, Jaguars, Browns, Vikings, Raiders. Probably neither of them, but these are good teams. It's not like a team that has 3 wins and they're just trying to finish out the season. So invest in your backup quarterbacks, guys.
Yes. No, that's true. And it's interesting, that I agree. I have to say for a second that CJ Beathard, he just, man, when he was coming in that game on Monday night, like, I'm sorry, but like, I don't know. I know
He
that
didn't look
looks don't
confident.
matter, but he looked like he just got off the couch after chugging like a 12 pack, and
He
then
might
like,
have.
like he just, I don't know what it was about him, man, but it looks like if you thought of somebody just like, like that you'd want to like go to a party with, looks like that type of guy. And there he was running out there and he let him down and they, let him on that field goal drive. So be curious to see what he looks like again this week, but that gave me a good laugh.
Well, honestly, his body language just looked nervous to me. Maybe I'm misreading that, but going out there, and maybe it was exacerbated by the safe play calling, right? The screens, the short passes. They didn't really overall ask him to do much. I believe he had that one deep shot to Ridley that was called back.
Yep. Like a
But
hold, yeah.
besides that, it was pretty safe. And definitely not the play calling they would have done with Trevor Lawrence. So whether it was that or just his body language, he looked a bit nervous. I'm sure he'll be able to have a good week of practice and prepare for this upcoming game. But the Jaguars team as a whole, I'm not sure how talented I think they are. I think they have talent, but they don't have overwhelmingly good talent in most positions. They're very serviceable in a lot of places. With Christian Kirk getting injured, that just he'll probably play this upcoming week, I believe. I'm not sure whether he plays or not. He's a bit hobbled, and they don't have the best receiving core, right? They don't have the best offensive line. One of their best weapons is Evan Ingram, right? The tight end. And on defense, Josh Allen's having a great season, if I recall correctly, but they don't have tremendous talent on the defensive line or around it. Just they're a very good team, but they need to bring some blue chip talent in here over the offseason and really help Trevor Lawrence elevate this offense, I'd say.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. So it'll be a lot. I think they'll be active in free agency, and we'll see what happens at the draft.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that the Browns are favored without anyone knowing who their quarterback is. A lot of times when quarterbacks are not declared, they just remove the lines, right? It makes sense. They don't know what's going to happen. But the lines are out here, and I guess they're saying it doesn't matter between Flacco or Thompson Robinson or PJ Walker, whoever they put out there. It's good enough. It's all about the same in terms of moving the needle, right? So I think the Browns do take it over Jacksonville, but and if they do, Jacksonville is definitely not guaranteed that playoff spot.
Yeah,
because the Houston Texans are playing the Jets this week. First of all,
who also don't have a quarterback.
Right? Gosh, what's going on this year, man? These quarterbacks are just dropping like flies. I saw funny. Someone had a preseason parlay. It was like a 6-way parlay of quarterbacks projected to get over a certain amount of yards. And the first 5 were injured. And then it was Jared Goff. He was saying everyone starting to get a little worried for Jared Goff here. But I think the Texans can handle the Jets. I do think, once again, it'll be a low-scoring game. I said that about the Jets game last week against the Falcons. I just hit the under no matter what. And guess what? There were 21 total points scored that game. So it might be a similar game now. The Texans do have a more electric offense than the Falcons, but Tank Dell is out. Tank Dell is not playing this week. He's out for this season. That was a hard injury to watch. You got to feel sorry for him. It's really easy to yell at the coaches and say, why are you putting a 160-pound man in the middle of an inside run? But I mean, the coaches are using their personnel. They're doing a great job. I don't want to be quick to blame them for an injury. They're just trying to win the game. Yeah, it happens. Yep. So I do think the Texans still win. Maybe CJ Stroud, not the best fantasy football start this week. Noah Brown is still not himself. He has Nico Collins, and that's it seems. Dalton Schultz. He's not a world beater. So maybe I'm starting to convince myself that the Jets have a chance this week.
Well, the Jets defense has played well. I mean, we talked a lot about, in our preseason predictions, we were looking at this Jets team, and I know we talked about their defense, really carrying the team, and there was just so much unknown about the offense with so many new pieces brought in. And of course, that was even with us assuming that Aaron Rodgers was going to stay healthy. So, obviously the defense has been able to, for the most part, keep them in games. So, and I think that will happen again with the Texans. So I would still take the Texans. I still think the Texans, especially them fighting, for a playoff spot and how much this means to them. I think that unfortunately the Jets, I think it's obviously they're not, statistically eliminated, right? But they're pretty much done. So at this point, they're not helping themselves out by winning any games other than the morale, right? For the program. But yeah, Alex,
I was just gonna say on this game, tell me what you think the Jets are gonna do, because Aaron Rodgers wants to come back, right? He wants to come back. He seems to have sort of a stranglehold on the organization right now. They brought in Hackett, they brought in a bunch of players that he wanted to bring in, most of whom are not performing well, and if he wants to play at the end of the season, one, will he? And then two, with regards to coaching changes over the offseason, do you think that Aaron Rodgers has a big say in what happens over the offseason? If he likes guys, do you think they stay just because they have so much invested in him? Or do you think that, that's ridiculous, no player is going to have that much say, let the organization do its thing?
Yeah, those are great questions, Cam. We got to get Brian, our resident Jets fan, back on here. Get his take on it.
He's not getting a tattoo this year.
Yeah, no Joe Namath tattoo. So yeah, I think that at this point, because of the Jets sort of put all their chips on the table, right? And I don't blame them. I don't, you got to, sometimes to hit a home run, you got to take a swing, right? So I understand what they, I understand, and I think a lot of organizations would have done the same thing had they been in their position. But that's also part of it, right? It's a risk. It's part of doing business. It's part of those decisions. So I think at this point, Rodgers is under contract again next year. Now, luckily, he gave him a little bit of money back in that deal when he restructured it, but he's coming back, right? And whether or not he plays at the end of the season, he's going to be back. And while he's still playing for the Jets, I'm sure he expects things to be done the way he wants it, right? That was his biggest problem in Green Bay, is that he felt like he always had to throw his weight around to get things done that he wanted to get done. But like you said, a lot of these decisions Aaron Rodgers have made, have really not. A lot of it has been trying to retain players that are clearly past their prime and declining. I know Jordy Nelson comes to mind, right? And there was, Aaron Rodgers was very upset when they moved on from Jordy Nelson. He was a shell of himself when he went to the Raiders, right? He barely could run routes. So, Aaron Rodgers doesn't exactly have a track record of forcing the organization to hang on to high quality players, or at least that they're still playing at that high level. So I do think that Rodgers, because of his determination, I think we might see him come in, or at least he's going to want to come in at the end of the year. But I do think that I almost wonder if the organization, though, it just says, you know what, it's not worth it. We're not going to make the playoffs. We don't want you in there. We want you fully healthy for next season. And I do think they try to run it back again, one more year with this coaching staff.
Oh, they definitely. Okay. Yeah, they
I think
definitely
they
try to
will.
run it back with Rodgers. I think that they retain at least the majority of their coaches. I don't think
But I
Robert
would
Saleh
expect,
is
I would hope that the Jets, though, would go out and, like you said earlier, about backup quarterback, I would hope that they just cut the ties with Zach Wilson. Obviously,
Yes.
it's done. It's done, right? So go out there, get a veteran backup, a guy that you know that you can plug in. And no, he won't be Aaron Rodgers, but he gives you a shot. You know, a guy like Joshua Dobbs, right, who we've talked about at length, right? He's not Joshua Dobbs isn't going to take you to a Super Bowl if he plays the whole season, but he can jump in and be effective, right, for 3, 4, 5 games. And so you have to protect that. You got to go into next season expecting Rodgers won't be available for the entire year. So go out there, invest in a really good backup quarterback, and have that person ready to roll.
Yeah, I agree. And, it made sense to go all in this season. They have the roster to do it. I think most other organizations in their situation would have done it as well.
Yep.
One thing that didn't make a lot of sense to me was their draft selection of Will McDonald at pick 15. I get that they wanted another edge rusher. They got Jermaine Johnson in the first round last year. They have edge rush talent aside from him as well, but they wanted that speedy, twitched up guy. But the thing is, they're trying to win right now. And Will McDonald at Iowa State was used a lot on the interior, it was a horrific use of his talent. He was like 239, playing like 3-tech, playing 4-eye, going up against double strong side end. It was weird. And so he's not very refined. And he was not going to make an immediate impact coming out. Whereas you go a few picks later, you get someone like, I'm not going to say cornerback because they have their stud cornerbacks, but a lot of people were mocking them. Kalijah Kancey, someone who could have started immediately next to Quinnen Williams, someone who already has technique. I know he's not having the best season. I don't really think he fits well in Tampa Bay, but someone who could make an impact right away, right? All the receivers are there, right? Before you had Garrett Wilson, and then you brought in Allen Lazard, and you brought in Mecole Hardman, right? You brought in a bunch of guys who are like okay wide receiver 3s. You wanted Allen Lazard to be your 2. It didn't work out. I think a lot of talent evaluators would have told you the same thing. Go get someone who's refined, someone like Jordan Addison, who could start right away. Now, it might seem like it's hindsight scouting, saying the 4th wide receiver taken in the draft should be the one taken first, but they were all taken back to back, and they were all different, right? Jackson Smith-Njigba, recovering from an injury, didn't even play at Ohio State last year. Quinn Johnston, great mover, someone with high potential, who you knew wasn't going to be good off the bat, and guess what? He hasn't been.
He's not.
Right? Mm-hmm. And then you have Zay Flowers and Addison, and they're both separators. They're very different players, but they both are separators and guys who've contributed right away, and that's sort of what was expected of them, right? So I would have thought that, at least with their first round pick, the Jets would give either the quarterback they just brought in, their Hall of Fame quarterback, someone to throw the ball to, someone who can get open, or improve their already amazing defense, right? Which also helps the quarterback, right? It helps him get in better field position. You get another true pass rusher in there. Kalijah Kancey next to Quinnen Williams would have been so much fun to watch on 3rd down, 3rd and 7+, right? Because they can get after it. So it was odd. Will McDonald, I don't believe he's had too many snaps this year, but they're definitely going to run it back next year and hey, if McDonald's improves this year and starts and wrecks the game next year, then I'll have egg on my face for this whole conversation. But I don't know. They just make some peculiar moves, right? And Aaron Rodgers has to be frustrated with that throughout his career, right? You think of the Packers bringing in Jordan Love and then A.J. Dillon with their first 2 picks a few years ago. It's like, all right, you're in a Super Bowl window. You bring in a quarterback to be a backup for 3 years, right? It didn't make much sense with where they were. And I think, I heard recently someone say that one of the worst things NFL teams do is self-evaluate. They really never know where they are. They always love their players. And I just think it leads to some odd decisions. So I guess that's my rant for this podcast on the Jets. But I do think that they come back next year. They're going to have the same conversations that we had this whole last offseason about how Aaron Rodgers is going to change this team. And hopefully it actually happens this upcoming year, because this is probably Rodgers' last year.
Yep. And they need some offensive line help, whether that be spend a lot of money, trade, draft, whatever you have to do, because I know it's hard to fix it in 1 year. It is hard, but it can be done. I think about the Chiefs going back to win that 2020 Super Bowl, the one against the Buccaneers, right? They had their starting left tackle gets hurt in the AFC Championship game, so they take their backup right tackle and have him play left tackle. And they had multiple other injuries in the line. And I mean, you saw that. I mean, they had no chance in that Super Bowl against the Bucs. No chance. Mahomes was running for his life every play. I mean, he had 2 seconds and there was a linebacker in his face. And so in one season, the Chiefs went out. They focused on the draft, drafted 2 starters. That following draft, went out and paid big money for Tooney, brought him in, made a big trade at that time to get Orlando Brown Jr. And then they have been able to retain those guys, or most of those guys, and have one of the better offensive lines in the NFL. I think about the Cowboys and some of the offensive line renovations they've went through. So there's definitely teams that can do it. And the Jets, back to that self-evaluation, right? They have to look and see if we have any chance to keep Rodgers healthy, we have to protect him. And right now, the guys they have, they're not getting it done. Yeah,
and I didn't bring up offensive line before because Broderick Jones went the pick before them, and I know Jets fans always get a little upset when you bring up the fact that the Jets actually wanted Broderick Jones, and he was taken the pick before them after they traded down from 13 to 15. The board did fall in an unfortunate way for them, right? You have the Jets were at pick 15. There were offensive tackles taking picks 10, 11, and 14, right? And after that, the next tackle taken was by the Jaguars with Anton Harrison, and he was deemed not pro ready by a lot of evaluators as well. So a little unfortunate there, but here we are. I think they run it back next year. I do think they become a very good team next year with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. Even if he can't move, I think he's a lot better than what they've shown this year. All right, man. Any other games you want to touch on before we get going?
Yeah,
want to talk about your Chiefs.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the game I want to at least touch on for a minute would be the Bills and the Chiefs. This game has lost a little bit of its shine, I would say, as what it looked like at the beginning of the season. Looking at this stretch that the Chiefs have, when I first saw the schedule, knowing that they were going to be playing, obviously, the Eagles, right, in that Super Bowl rematch. And then the Raiders, which that, of course, for the Chiefs, as Chiefs fans, it's like, hey, that's a win. And then after that, we didn't really know what to think of the Packers, but then knowing that this Bills game was coming up and then the Bengals is going to be a few weeks later, I was like, man, this could be a tough stretch there for the Chiefs. But the Bills, we talked about them quite a bit in our last couple of podcasts about some of the defensive issues that they have. I know they have some injuries, and obviously Allen is just a turnover machine. And maybe he misses Dayball. Maybe he's just having a down year. But he did look really good against the Eagles. And the Bills are coming off a bye, and they're desperate. And when you add especially that little bit of extra rest and that desperation of knowing they're going to have to play their best football to go on the road, to go into Arrowhead and beat the Chiefs. And they've actually been able to do that during the regular season. The last 2 times they've played in the regular season, the Bills have beat the Chiefs both of those games. They were close games, so they certainly were not lopsided games. They were, coin flip games that could have went either way, but they were able to get that done. So, I do expect to see, the Chiefs, hopefully some of those guys can bounce back from injury, and I think their defense will play well. I think it's going to be an exciting game. I do think the Chiefs are still going to win. I would take them by maybe a touchdown, maybe 4 points, something like that. Not lopsided either way, but I do think that there's definitely a chance the Chiefs get upset. Playing against a desperate team off of a bye. The Eagles just saw what that's like. I mean, the Niners weren't desperate, but the Niners were highly motivated, right, to get revenge, and we're coming off of a restful week. And I know the Bills still, they still look at the Chiefs and certainly, have had a bit of a rivalry with the Chiefs and really want to knock them out. So I do expect to see the Bills come out swinging and really give everything they have to beat the Chiefs. So I'm excited to see it. It should be a great game, and I'm excited to see how the Chiefs bounce back after a disappointing performance against the Packers.
Yeah, the initial line seemed a little disrespectful to me, right? Kansas City 2.5 at home. So that's essentially a pick 'em, as you would say.
Mm-hmm.
But everything you said makes perfect sense. So I think the Chiefs take it, but it could be a very close game.
Yep.
All right. Now, I know we touched on it, but I think the most exciting game of the week for me, Commanders are on bye, so I'll be rooting for those 4-win teams this week. But the Eagles Cowboys is just going to be fun. I think they're over under 1.5 fights this game, Alex.
I'm going to take the over on that because I just saw this Niners Eagles game, and I mean Dom's got to be back there, right? He's going to be back on the sideline pointing at people, looking like a mob boss up there.
He's a big dude.
Maybe
really big.
Maybe this whole thing is that the Eagles are actually like a money laundering operation, or something like that, right? But either way, I do think that the Cowboys really want to come out and they really want to win this game, and show that they're legit, show that they should be considered elite alongside the 49ers and the Eagles. And I think the Eagles, though, obviously want to bounce back and have a much better performance. So, and that Micah Parsons has been talking a whole lot since, earlier in the season. And so, the Eagles players, they hear that, AJ Brown, right? I mean, he's a guy that I know responds sometimes to some of the chatter, and man, it's going to be fun. I hope it's another just knockdown, drag out, give me a couple fights, give me some ejections, give me a brutal game, and I'll be very happy. I'll be like that gif of just eating popcorn and smiling.
As long as the ejections aren't Derwin James style. No. I don't even know if he got ejected, but the hits over the middle, helmet to helmet, you don't want those. You want ejections from guys taking off their helmets and slapping each other across the face. Just
or like after taking a guy and blocking him into the stands, right? Like I love that, when they take him and you keep trying to pancake him and you take him off and you're like pancaking him on the side. That ain't gonna hurt him. He's gonna be fine. It's not like that's gonna hurt him, but it might hurt his feelings, but either way, it's like, no, I don't want to see I don't want to see anybody get a concussion or anything like that.
That's called a Trevor Penning, by the way.
Yeah.
Taking a guy and pushing him into the stands when the play's over. Now, he needs to learn how to play football before he can do that again. But that's a different story. Now, Alex, I don't think you've given us your dumpster fire game.
You're right. I haven't.
What it is.
What do you think it is?
Panthers Saints.
I actually thought about that. It's actually not, surprisingly, even though I know our listeners, are going to at me and be like, I hate the NFC South, right? Because a lot of my dumpster fire games have involved teams from the AFC South.
Mostly the Panthers,
Yeah, mostly the Panthers, right? But I mean, in this game, it's actually has playoff implications, which is pretty funny to think about. That it's the 5-7 and the 6-6 Falcons, and that they, the winner of this will be obviously in a good position. I think I just switched games on you. Sorry. I meant the Saints Panthers. But anyway, my dumpster fire game is actually going to be the Thursday night game. It's going to be the Patriots and the Steelers. I know the Steelers are in the mix for the playoffs still, but I mean, I kind of have seen enough Mitch Trubisky. I don't need to see any more Mitch Trubisky. And even with Pickett, the Steelers offense is just dreadfully painful to watch. They can't move the ball. It's very unoriginal. I mean, unless you enjoy seeing Najee Harris run like 3 yards into like a brick wall and fall over and to have that happen like 20, 30 times a game. If that's what you like, that's fine.
Well,
more power to you.
Going.
I know, but so that's not going to be an easy watch. And then obviously we talked about that 6-0 win, the Chargers over the Patriots. I mean, this Patriots team is unwatchable. They're offensively, they're even worse than the Steelers. So That it's painful. So that's my dumpster fire
Uh,
game.
Alex, did you see the over under for that game?
No, let me see.
Take a guess. Just take a guess.
Oh well, I mean,
You saw it?
I just saw it 30, right?
Yeah. I see 30.5 here. I've never seen that.
I'm gonna take
I
the
don't think.
under. Maybe I think I might take the under.
That's the thing. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh, that is wild. So if I have to make a prediction,
Yeah.
give me like a 9-3 win. Steelers, no touchdowns, 9-3 Steelers over Patriots.
Oh, that's gonna be fun. Fun watch. I'll be rooting for the Patriots because they have fewer wins, and I don't want them to get Drake May. All right. Now this upcoming Monday we have a doubleheader once again.
Is it a doubleheader though? I mean,
it's not the same. They're overlapping games.
Overlapping games. Come on.
What
are we doing, ESPN? What are we doing? Okay, go ahead.
Packers Giants. I think the Packers just win. And then Dolphins Titans. I think the Dolphins again. They have a 13.5 spread. So I think the Dolphins win that game as well.
Yeah, I agree. I wish they would switch that up though. I would be okay with overlapping games if it was the Packers and the Dolphins. That sounds like a fun game. I'd watch that. And that could overlap the Titans and the Giants because I don't want to watch that. So unfortunately, though, it is what it is. So yeah, I mean,
it's not really how flex scheduling works, Alex.
Exactly. That'd be like, that's more like relegation, right? But I do. The Dolphins are always a fun watch. Watching Tyreek Hill run past everyone and Tua just like chuck it as far as he can. That's great. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, and I think we've officially at least talked about every game this week except for the Rams and Ravens. But not much to say. I think the Ravens take this pretty handily. Anything else?
I think the Rams are surprisingly feisty. I think they actually are in the mix to grab one of those last seeds in the NFL. I mean the NFC. So they're feisty, but I mean, yeah, the Ravens are at home. They're favored by a touchdown. They'll get it done. They'll get it done.
Only one touchdown. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, 7.5 at home. All right. I would have guessed it would be around 10. So maybe I'll take that spread. I don't like taking 7.5 spreads though. 7.5, 6.5 I do. 7.5 is a little risky for me. All right, man. Anything else before we hit the road?
I don't think so. I guess I got one question for you though as we wrap up. Who would you say right now is the MVP? Because I've seen a lot of discussion about that, as there always is, and the parity in the NFL this year has been actually pretty impressive. I mean, I think that even comes to some of these races. I know I'll let you go. I'll give you a chance to think. I mean, for me, I think it has to be quarterback, right? Who do you think?
Right now, he has to finish the season strong. I think it's Dak.
Dak. Oh man, really?
I think he's played the best of all the quarterbacks so far.
But what do you think is his signature win though? Because I feel like you need.
This week against the Eagles.
You're right. If he balls out and beats the Eagles, then absolutely, I would agree he'd be a front runner for sure.
If he scores 4 touchdowns against the Eagles, lock it, because he's just that'll be his win. I think he's looked the best ever since the 49ers game. All right. Ever since then, he's looked like the best quarterback in the NFL. He's put up great stats. He has the highest PFF grade. He's just doing everything. And whether you want to talk about how his average depth of target has increased drastically, how they're actually, spreading the ball out a bit more, getting Cooks more involved and whatnot. He's playing better. He's seeing the field better. I don't know what's going on. But I think, if you say it has to be a quarterback, it's Dak. Now, the only other quarterbacks in the running right now, I mean, again, Lamar. Do you go Mahomes? I don't think he's put up an MVP performance this year. Everyone knows Mahomes is, if you could have any quarterback on your team, who would it be? It's Mahomes, right? That's just the default answer. But he hasn't put up an MVP performance in my eyes. And if I had to choose a player who I think is the least replaceable of any player, it would be Tyreek Hill,
Yep.
right? I think he's making a very strong case for MVP. But will they give it to him? Probably not. Probably not. If all the quarterbacks we've mentioned go out and just have awful stretches to round out the season, I think it's possible.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's what has to happen though, right? No one can separate themselves, because that's what I was going to say. I think that Tyreek Hill has been the most valuable player, but it's just unlikely for him to win that award. I do think that Lamar and Mahomes will be in the mix, especially because, it's usually goes to a top team, right? It's usually kind of the top quarterback on the top team is generally, or one of the top teams, where they go with it. So I think that if Lamar and Mahomes both finish the year strong, I think they'll both be in the mix. And then on the other side, I think Hurts still has a chance to get back in the mix a little bit too, if he finishes out the year strong. So, but yeah, I think Dak can definitely strengthen his case with a big game this weekend. I don't think Purdy should be in the mix because, and I like Brock Purdy. My dad went to Iowa State. I watched him all 4 years in college, right? I love me some Brock Purdy. But do we really think that if you were to take, half of the other quarterbacks or more and stick them on this Niners team, understand the offense, the Shanahan offense, and have them execute, do we think that they could not come close to or even outproduce Purdy? And so
that's not the question, right? You could say that about a lot of quarterbacks. I understand throwing any quarterback into, if you put a quarterback in a scheme, it's probably the most friendly putting it into that scheme. But the production and the results are really what do matter, right? And as you said, what has been Dak's signature game? Well, Purdy has had a signature game at this point, right? He just
a couple of them,
the Eagles,
yeah. And the Cowboys.
Yeah.
No, so he does have that, but also, like, if you're not the best player on your team, right? If you're not the most valuable player on your team, how can you be the most valuable player in the league? I would argue that Christian McCaffrey is more valuable on that offense than Purdy. And maybe you could say not, because they had Christian McCaffrey in the playoff game against the Eagles and they didn't have Purdy, and we all saw what happened there. So, I understand the arguments on both sides. I would have a tough time. I would have a tough time giving it to Purdy when there's so many, when it seems like the margin of error for him in that offense is just so much less than what some of these other quarterbacks that are putting up elite numbers are working with, including Dak.
Yeah, I also apologize for unmuting my mic just to cough for you guys. That was great. Yeah, so I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with what you're saying about Brock Purdy. I just wanted to throw out that I think that he is in consideration. And looking at the betting odds right now, I guess I was right. Dak's number one across the board. There's some sites that do have Brock Purdy number one, but those are the 1 and 2. And then it goes Hurts, Mahomes, Tua, Lamar, Tyreek, CJ Stroud. I keep wanting to include that next guy, but Stroud is number, what is that, 8? That's crazy. He's he's a lock for rookie of the year.
Oh, for sure. Sure. And I think Tyreek is going to be offensive player of the year. I think that's a lock too. Yeah. Right. So yeah, but I do think it'll be, that would be something if Dak wins MVP. Yeah, that would be something for sure.
I love that they're betting odds on Jordan Love, and they're better than the odds of Justin Herbert. I think that's just funny. Looking at this, I'll look at it more later. But I think it's Dak. Who would you go with right now? Just what guy?
Oh man,
take a pick on the spot.
Oh man, no, that's good. People are going to call me hypocritical, but maybe I'd pick Purdy. I don't know. No, I'd go with Mahomes. And here's why. I think that even though Mahomes hasn't had the best year, and I am a homer, he also has had less to work with, and I think that actually strengthens his case a little bit than obviously probably Purdy or Dak. So I go with Mahomes.
Okay,
but I'm reasonable. A homer. I'm a homer.
No, reasonable. Fourth in betting odds right now, and again, I think he's the best of all those players. Right, so you can't really argue against it too much. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week. We'll try to get back with you on either Tuesday or Wednesday from here on out. And starting pretty soon, I'm going to be sprinkling those bonus episodes I alluded to about the NFL draft last week. So watch out for those. They'll be random. They won't be advertised. They'll be pretty sporadic, but I'm looking forward to getting a little extra content out there for your ears. Now, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Make sure to like, comment, and smash that subscribe button. And really, really do engage with us, guys. If you want to be on the show, remember, this is a fan-based show. We love having people on here. We've been really busy with holidays and traveling, and it's, entering the Christmas season and whatnot. It gets a little bit harder, but if you want to be on the show, that's still an open invitation to reach out to us, talk to us a little bit if we don't already know you as well, and we'll talk about it. So make sure to reach out, and we will see you next week. Have a great weekend watching football, guys. Peace.
Peace.